first thought. Representative Peter Roskam is a Republican from Wheaton. He is live in our bureau in Washington, D.C. tonight. Congressman, where do you stand in the debt debate at this moment?
Well, I think most Americans look at Washington, D.C. and they want to see two things happen. They want to see the trajectory change in terms of spending, and they made that message loud and clear last November, and they want to see ultimately the debt ceiling raised, but it to be done in a thoughtful way. So what we're trying to work out right now in the House is a pathway forward to get something on President Obama's desk that ultimately accomplishes those two goals. Now, there's been a little bit of a setback in terms of timing, because once you actually put a plan in place and it's scored by the Congressional Budget Office, then all kinds of folks have the opportunity to look at it. And that's par for the course. That's part of the legislative process, and that's what we're in the midst of right now.
Congressman, most Americans, I think, are tired of what they see as political posturing. Are you folks sensing some of that? They want somebody to blink fast. You know what I mean?
Oh, I understand that. I think the public is looking at Washington and they're saying, do two things, and you can walk and chew gum at the same time, Washington. You really can. You can raise the debt ceiling in a way that makes sense, but don't do it in a pathway that just writes a blank check. Most Americans are saying, look, we're dealing with these struggles over our dining room table. We're dealing with these struggles in our businesses, and we have made difficult choices at home and at work. Now, it's incumbent on the federal government to live up to that same expectation and that same citizen leadership that we've seen around the country. So there's a pathway forward on this thing, and I think ultimately cooler heads prevail. But the notion of simply writing a blank check and moving forward with there no end in sight in the debt ceiling, I think ultimately is something that the country said we just cannot tolerate that. So make the cuts, raise the debt ceiling, but do it in a thoughtful way.
Here's what Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, had to say today. Listen.
We need to re-engage with the president, the only person in America who can sign a bill into law, and get a bipartisan solution that can pass the House, pass the Senate, and be signed by the president.
Representative Roskam, how much of a rift is there in the Republican Party right now?
Well, I think there's very thoughtful people that are trying to reflect what they're hearing in their constituencies. Remember, last November was a tumultuous election that sent an entirely different group of people to Washington, D.C., and they woke up and said, we're not going to continue on a pathway where our national debt is tripled in 10 years, and then this administration has literally accumulated more debt than the previous 43 presidents. So to overstate the nature of the concern about spending is almost impossible to do. So you've got a lot of people that have said we've got to move forward and make the pathway differently insofar as spending goes. And I think there's a great deal of frustration at the White House right now. The White House press secretary for about 10 minutes today was trying to explain why the White House has not offered their own solution to this. There's been a whole host of little dot points and other suggestions and talking points, but the White House hasn't offered a plan. What it really comes down to is having to offer substantive pieces of legislation that elected members of Congress and the United States Senate vote on and then ultimately put on the president's desk. So we're coming down to it, 7 days away, and the clock is ticking, but I'm absolutely convinced that we can do this, we can be thoughtful about it, we can change the spending trajectory, and ultimately make sure that the United States doesn't default on any obligations.
And hopefully we're not going to lose our AAA credit rating in the process. As you said, it's 1 week from today. Do you see this turning out well?
Well, look, I mean, the AAA credit rating has a lot to do, and the rating agencies are really breathing down the necks of the federal government right now, saying you've got to change this pathway as it relates to spending. You've got to close these deficit gaps that are so outrageous and have caused all this level of anxiety. So I'm committed to working with my colleagues in the White House and those over in the Senate to get this done. But the bottom line is we can do two things at the same time. You can cut the spending and you can meet the federal obligations and do it in such a way to get us back on a pathway to economic strength and a robust economy, which is where we all want to be.
Yep. Well, we all hope somebody blinks soon. Thanks to Representative Roskam, Republican from Wheaton, for joining us from Washington tonight. And tomorrow morning on Good Day Chicago, Senator Dick Durbin will be here. Thanks again, sir.
Thank you.
Here in Chicago, there's